hand it right over to the fabulous, always amazing Nancy Akhavan, so we can learn about supporting early interventions. Hand it off.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you and good to be with you today. Just a little bit about me before we get started. I am a thought partner for Callie, and now I'm a thought partner for the early intervention work, and I'm really glad to be with you. Currently, I'm an associate professor at Fresno State, but I was in K-12 education for 25 years in a variety of roles, including teaching. I was a principal of 3 different schools. I was assistant superintendent in Fresno Unified, supervising schools. But a lot of my work is based on the writing that I do for teachers. So I am an author of 13 books, helping teachers grow in their development. I've provided consulting services across the United States and internationally on literacy and content areas, English language learners. And today we're talking about intervention, and I've done a lot of work with districts in intervention. So it's nice to be with you, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. We're here today to continue your work and talk about ways that you can support early intervention. And one of my books that I use a lot with intervention with several districts in secondary schools is the Nonfiction Now Lesson Bank. You can always message me at nancy@nancyakhavan.com if you want some pages out of that. I'd be glad to just give them to you about some things that you can try. So if you, as we continue working together. One of the things we're going to be talking about is the intervention series. So today is really a launch, and I'm going to be inviting you to participate in more intervention sessions with us, and also working with me in between, or one of my team members, because I have a whole team that works for me. And I will be helping you with designing some interventions that you might be looking at for your classroom, for your school, or for your district. And we'll be giving some more information about that at the end of the session. We're going to be talking about what is an intervention and what makes a good intervention. And then we're going to also be having some conversation about how does an early intervention differ from current interventions. And again, like I said, I'll be sharing some planning for future sessions with you. So to be able to follow along where I am, because sometimes I talk too much, and I'll try to stop talking and give you time to talk and share out with one another. But I've really set our agenda in 4 phases. The first is about the purpose of intervention. The second part is about good interventions. The third part is thinking about monitoring student progress and learning during intervention. And then the fourth is our future work together. And I'm going to be highlighting each part in red as I go, so you'll know when you see it where we are. Because sometimes I've listened to speakers that just seem to be going on forever, and I'm like, where are we in the course of action today? So I'm hoping to keep you engaged and keep you focused, and give you that little breadcrumb tail to let you know where we are. The biggest reason that I focus and believe in intervention is not because sometimes things come mandated from the state that we need to have intervention in place, or that we're looking at just raising student scores. That's not what intervention is about to me. For me, intervention is about equity, providing each student what they need to learn at the highest level. So for many years, I was assistant superintendent supervising middle schools, and also doing professional development for the high schools and helping the high schools implement some action plans. And one of the things that became apparent is sometimes students exit high school without all the tools necessary to do whatever it is that they could possibly want. And I have a real life story from that hurt my heart. So I was, right after I left, I try and get my story straight so I tell it in the right order. Right after I left Fresno Unified, I went to Fresno State, and I was the single subject credential coordinator. And part of my job in recruiting students to become teachers was to interview them about why they wanted to become a teacher. And one young man came into my office and started talking with me, and we realized that he was a student at one of the middle schools while I was the supervisor of that school. That's the key piece here. And he started to share with me that it was so hard for him to go to college because when he graduated from high school, he wasn't A to G ready. And he said, the reason I want to become a teacher is I want to make sure that I do everything necessary to help students so they can realize whatever dream that they have, whether that's college or career. And he said, and I just don't understand. So he went to a middle school in a very low income, high diversity area of Fresno, ridden with gangs, ridden with institutional poverty. There were some things going on there. And he said to me, my cousins were in gangs. My brother was in a gang. I never joined a gang. I came to school every single day. I did that through middle school. I did that through high school. How come it ended up that I wasn't ready to go to college at the end? And that stung because I was the supervisor of that school, right? So I'm thinking, well, we really weren't doing the work I thought we were doing, right? Because I'm sure he's not the only student that slipped through the cracks. And so I really believe that intervention is about equity. We need to provide every student what they need to learn at the highest level. And every student needs something slightly different. Often in our instruction, because of the pressure that we have to cover our curriculum, the pressure that we have perhaps on pacing guides, the pressure that we have to meet expectations by the end of whatever syllabi we are using and have in place, we do what works for most. But what works for most does not work for all. So the piece of intervention is about stopping and thinking what's going to work for all and how can I provide help to students in a way that meets their individual needs. Often systems downdraft students without realizing they're doing it. So I don't have this slide here and I don't want to talk about it as a blame situation, but we're either updrafting students for high achievement, which could be college or career. It doesn't have to be college, doing college and career. Or we could be downdrafting students, which is, let's just get you a diploma, but you're not ready to take on the next step in your life because you don't have all options available to you upon graduation. So you can think, in my classroom, in my school, are we updrafting or are we downdrafting? And usually downdrafting comes it's not purposeful. So we're all there as teachers to do our best work. And we're there as teachers to do what students need of us. But sometimes the system that we're in is creating a situation that's a downdraft for students, which means you might be negotiating a lot on grades with students, not thinking of their learning, but just negotiating grades. You might be in a defensive teaching mode. You just might feel defensive as a teacher. Your students might be disengaged from you. Overall in the school, there could be low expectations. Again, I'm not blaming, I'm not shaming. I'm just saying we might be where we are because your system is created to get the results that it's getting, which often leads to low achievement, which on this slide I've said is this diploma, getting a high school diploma. We know that many students that get downdrafted drop out and don't get the diploma. So updrafting is working in a common way together or individually within your classroom to make sure that achievement is essential. And that intervention falls into an updraft situation. It's about having high expectations to lead students to achieve academically and go to college or career based on what choices they have. So it's about high expectations, and intervention is actually about high expectations. I was asked about that a couple of years ago, a teacher who said, Nancy, you're suggesting that I put intervention in my classroom as part of my first teaching, but doesn't that mean I have low expectations if I'm assuming students aren't doing well? And I said, no. I know when I teach that not everybody learns everything and that I need to intervene to make sure that everybody is learning everything at the highest level that they can. So I'm not assuming they don't know. I'm not assuming they cannot. I'm assuming that by teaching in one mode or only teaching one way, I'm not catching everyone, and I need to, in an equitable manner, meet everybody's needs. So the other important thing with intervention is thinking about multi-tiered systems of support, or known as MTSS. And in multi-tiered systems of support, there's 3 levels. There's tier 1, which is universal support for all. That's good first teaching. That's what happens in your classroom every period. That is not pull out, that is not push in. That is you in your classroom. The next tier is targeted support for some. So that is when a student has been identified as needing some additional help in a very specific way, and they may be perhaps receiving, instead of an elective, maybe they're in a class that is giving them some more math support. That in itself is a problem because everyone deserves to have an elective. I know when we're talking equity, there is equity to students having to have a class as an intervention rather than being able to have access to electives that could be keeping them engaged in school, but I'm not going to go there today. That's another day for another discussion. And then there's tier 3, which is intensive support, and that is for a few. And just so you know, all of these tiers happen before special education. So we would want students who need intensive support to move from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3 before they're ever identified for special education. Because we also have a problem in California of disproportionality of students of color in special education. And we need to make sure that we're meeting students' needs who might have some needs in learning that have been overlooked in the past. So intervention that I'm talking about is happening at tier 1. It's tier 1 intervention. So couple of things in thinking about what first intervention is or is not. I've got some thoughts about what it is and what is not, and then I'm going to lean on you to write some of your is and is nots in the chat box. So first good teaching with intervention is additive. It's an additive process to help students with whatever they need to learn everything that they need to know in your classroom, in your school. And it is not assuming that there is a deficit model. It's not assuming that it's the student that's the problem. It's assuming that either the instruction was a problem or it was just a problem and they didn't get it, right? Because it doesn't mean that we have bad instruction. It just means that the way we did it, that particular student didn't get it, or they need to hear it another time. Good first intervention is also asset focused. So I mentioned those 2 things go together. It's additive, it's adding on to the student's knowledge, it's asset focused rather than deficit focused. It's action taken to ensure each student learns at the highest level based on assessment. So it's not by our hunch, it's not what we think is happening, it's not what we think should be happening, it's based on assessment. And a good first intervention teaches a concept in a new way or teaches it again to those who need it during first instruction. So there's quite a bit of research that has been done on the brain and how the brain learns. And one of them is it takes 50 touches with a new concept or a new idea for it to just enter long-term memory from short-term memory, 50 touches. Now that's not 50 incidences of education, but think how many times I've said good first intervention just in our session together. Chris, how many times do you think maybe I've said it so far? Good first intervention. Tell me a number.
8.
Okay, 8. So I'm well on my way to 50 already, right? So, and I've given you some slides to think about good first intervention. So it's, and now we're doing 2 different ways of looking at intervention, what it is and doing the anti-example, right? The opposite of what it is. So it takes 50 touches for something just to leave short-term memory and go to long-term memory. That doesn't include the neural pathways that are going to have to be created for learning to actually take place. So what intervention is not, it's not teaching based on your hunches of what you think a student needs. It's definitely not punitive. You don't give intervention because you're frustrated. You don't give intervention because you're angry. And there have been plenty of times when I've been teaching and I've been frustrated and angry. So I'm just calling it out, right? We all have days, we all have that student. It's not deficit focused, as I mentioned before. I am not assuming that the student isn't bringing everything they need. I am assuming that the instruction hasn't given everything that it needs to give to help the student learn at the highest level. The other thing it is, it's not teaching louder. That's my little joke, because once I was working with a teacher and she just heard when she would get frustrated or she was reteaching, her voice would just get louder. And it's like, oh, that doesn't help either. And I already mentioned it takes 50. It takes 50 touches. Intervention is also not a hoop that students have to jump through to earn a grade. So it's not like, oh, a student comes and says, I want to raise my grade. And you're like, well, come here to this group or this, on your lunch, I'm doing a session. And then you can, earn points to raise your grade. That's not intervention, right? That's more like a contract exchange for grades. So I want to share a story with you about this, a rather personal story about ways that we updraft and downdraft without realizing it. Is a few years ago, I was assistant superintendent in Fresno Unified, and I was overseeing the middle schools, 15 middle schools, and I worked with those schools on their systems. I worked closely with their principals. I worked with their leadership teams, and we were trying to raise achievement for all students in the district. Well, I left that job and went to Fresno State, where I am now as an associate professor. And when I first went to Fresno State, I was a single subject credential coordinator, and we interviewed all students coming in who wanted to be teachers. So I interviewed one young man who was Asian American. In particular, he was Hmong, and he had attended junior high or middle school when I was supervisor of the middle school that he was in. And he in his, when I asked him, well, why do you want to be a teacher? He says, I want to do things differently so that students will never experience what it is that I experienced. And so I said to him, well, what did you experience? And he said, he named the school that he went to, a very high poverty area, high diverse area in Fresno, and an area of town that would be considered urban. A lot of gang activity, a lot of difficulties our students face on a daily basis. And he said to me, I was never in a gang. My brother was in a gang, my cousins were in a gang. I was the one that didn't join a gang. I was the one that came to school every single day. I was the one that did everything my teachers told me to do. I did that through 7th grade, through 8th grade. I did it all the way through high school. And when I graduated, they told me that I couldn't go to college because I had to go take remedial classes at the junior college. So why, when I did everything that I was told to do, was I not ready for college? And that really is that story of equity for me. And I felt personal because I was the leader leading that school, that principal, that leadership team, those teachers, to make a difference for students, but we still weren't making a difference for all students. So I carry his story with me to remind me that the work has a name. It has a person's face. I see his face all the time. I think of him individually. It's not a number to me. It's about students like him who need to have all opportunities available to them upon the graduation. And they don't need to be told, just because you came to school every day and you did everything you were supposed to do and you did all your homework, you're still not ready and you can't do what you want to do with your life. Yet I want to just kind of give you a high level overview of what intervention can be. And Caitlin's going to drop that the connection to the Google Drive in the chat box so you can actually have these two handouts for yourself. So again, I've come back to intervention is equity, and look on the left-hand side. So in part of intervention is teacher is assessing for baseline knowledge. Now, I'm not saying that has to be a paper and pencil test. That can also be qualitative data that you're pulling from observation or what you're seeing from interaction and dialogue. You would need to analyze that data in some way. That does not have to be you taking a ton of time after school to dig into an assessment system and figure it out. Sometimes that can be a quick look, you looking at your own notes and making some decision. And it's that additional instruction or different instruction to make sure that students are learning the material. And then you're assessing another time to monitor for progress. How's that student doing? Did that student learn that point? Did that student get it? So ways of collecting data about learning are usually written, listening, or observation. We can hear it, we can see it, whether it's writing or it's a quiz or a test, or we can observe it. So that can be done, as I just mentioned, through tests, quizzes, rubrics, observational notes, anecdotal notes. And then ways to provide reteaching and support can be individually, small group, collaborative group, whole group with specific content comprehension strategies. So the things that I've listed on this handout for you are the things that I am hoping that we'll be able to work through together in this series focused on intervention. My goal is to work with each of you in your classrooms, in your system, to figure out what interventions you're going to put in place, what's doable right now in our Zoom land world, what might be doable for you in the future, and what does that look like? Because as content area teachers, you have a lot on your plate with content you have to meet. How do you slow down and provide intervention to make sure every student is learning the material? So that takes strategic work together. And that's what we're hoping to accomplish with this series. So I want to provide you with some thoughts from Hattie. Hattie says a few specific things about intervention with the details that I just listed on the previous slide. Individual, small group, collaborative, whole group, specific content comprehension strategies. What do those specific content comprehension strategies look like? And before I go into this, and unfortunately, I made the assumption that everybody knows that Hattie has done a meta-analysis of more than 800 research studies, and he's designed the effects and the outcomes of that meta-analysis on a scale. And he uses an appropriate scale that 0 is no effect of a strategy. And when you go to the negative numbers, it's negative effect on the strategy. And when you go to positive numbers, it's positive effect on the strategy. And the closer we get to 1, the higher the effect is on achievement, because 1 standard deviation from 0, 1 standard deviation equals 2 to 3 years growth for a student. So as you're looking at how close these strategies get to the number 1, think about how much growth the student might experience. So the first one, because one intervention is small group learning, you can see that it has an effect size of 0.49. So it has a strong purpose in being able to meet needs for students, but the type of small group that I'm suggesting during good first instruction is flexible. So I have worked with a group of math teachers before in 8th grade, and many of them taught in mini lesson chunks. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And as they released to the students to do the task, they might have already flagged based on noting who was comprehending, maybe by holding a whiteboard up when we're face-to-face. Right now, maybe writing a problem on a Padlet or a Google Jamboard about who was struggling, and then pulling those students quickly back into a group, even not if it might be a breakout group, or keeping them in the main session and sending everybody else to a breakout group to go over the information one more time. That is a small group, a very fluid, highly effective small group. Other small groups are developed over time and they stay with you for a while. Another piece of this good first intervention that I'm talking about is mastery learning. So as I mentioned, what intervention is it is focused on mastery learning. Is the student mastering, being able to know and being able to do whatever objective it is that you're teaching, whatever concept it is that you're teaching? So mastery learning has an effect size of 0.58. It is in the zone of desired effects. Another piece that is very good for intervention is doing worked examples for students. So for instance, recently I was working with a teacher who wanted to work on argument writing, and the students were to write a short argument. It was a social studies teacher. They were to write a short argument about the concept that they had been studying. And I said, how do they know what you want in an argument? So she worked up an example. So worked examples have an effect size of 0.57. Another part, another way of focusing on intervention is to provide direct instruction. Now, direct instruction has gotten a bad rap in years. There's absolutely nothing wrong with direct instruction, but it needs to be balanced with inquiry and exploration, problem solving as well. You don't want to only do direct instruction. And the other thing that's really important about direct instruction is it's direct to a point to make sure the student's mastering something, and then you move on. But I'm not talking skill and drill. I'm talking about, I'm going to work up a sample. I'm going to model. I'm going to do a think aloud. I'm going to make this very interactive and engaging with you while you're working on this particular objective, but I'm going to show you what it looks like. For many, many years, I worked in schools with high poverty Title I schools. And I realized that if we didn't provide the students the knowledge that they needed, they weren't going to learn it via osmosis from us. We needed to be direct in what it is that they needed to know. We needed to give them time to practice with follow-up coaching right then and there on the spot. So that way they knew what they were working on, and they knew when they were hitting the target so that they could move on to the next thing or a next idea. The other thing that happens during good intervention is providing formative evaluation for students, and that has a very high effect size of 0.90, nearly 1. And remember, the closer you are to one standard deviation, which would be 1.0 on this scale, is equal to 2 to 3 years growth in student achievement. So formative evaluation is the evaluation that I was talking about with intervention when I said you assess and then you teach based on what the student knows. So I might have been teaching a concept. I stop at some point, maybe after a week, I assess who's getting it and who's not. And then I'm going to do a reteach, a small group. I'm going to pull in based on what my formative assessment has told me in the classroom that's happening. So another part of intervening is the teacher presence down there at the bottom. So there's 3 pieces that I pulled out of Hattie on teacher presence when it comes to intervention. One is micro teaching, one is relationships, and another is teacher clarity. So micro teaching, which is teaching in mini lessons. In other words, I might teach in, let's say in a 50-minute period, maybe I start my period with 15 minutes of a lesson that involves direct instruction, highly engaging work with students so that they're talking and they're working through things. But my focus is on one objective. Boom, we're going to do it. You're going to interact. We're going to work on it before we maybe move on to some practice, or I close that and move on to another mini lesson. It's teaching in little chunks. It's breaking it down. It's not teaching in a lecture style. It's not taking 25 minutes of a 50-minute period for a lecture and then releasing students to work on it or to do whatever it is that they might need to do for the last 20 minutes. It's very specific. It's planned. Oh, I forgot to say, it has an effect size of 0.88, very high effect size. And if you notice, micro teaching is actually the first instruction. I haven't even assessed who knew what, but if I can get most of the students to learn it the very first time I teach it through mini lessons, then I don't even need as much deliberate intervention because the first instruction was the intervention. I know that we're all aware that relationships build student efficacy in the work that they do in their learning. And you might wonder, like, where do relationships fall into me talking about intervention? And I brought it in here because relationships between the teacher and the student have very high effect size. And relationships matter because nobody wants to learn from somebody that they think doesn't like them, or nobody wants to learn from somebody that they think can't do the work. So when we believe in our students, we're raising their efficacy and we're raising our efficacy toward what they're working for. Oh, I was gonna have you share one more thing, but I forgot I have one more slide. Let me do one more slide. The last one that I have here from Hattie is teacher clarity. So the clearer we are in our instruction, which means I'm breaking it down. I know exactly what I want the students to know and be able to do at the end of my lesson. And then I structure my lesson for them to be able to do that, has an effect size of 0.75. And if I'm working through the mini lessons with the micro teaching, and I have great relationships with my students where they know I believe in them, and I know that they think that I know that they can do it, and I'm very clear and I break my instruction down, I don't even have to do a lot of reteaching. I don't even have to pull a small group because I've done the work through how I'm doing my first instruction to start with. That's not probably my system of intervention, but it goes a long way. Okay, we're going to dive into our next section here. So we're going to talk about good interventions and what makes a quality intervention. I've already alluded to that. Right? And you guys got that because I can see it in the chat box, which is what are we doing to stop learning loss before it happens? But then we need to talk about what do we do to intervene if there is some learning loss, or there is the chance or the risk that there might be learning loss because you noticed during some quick assessment in the classroom while teaching, you had a couple of students not get it, right? So one of the important things is you assess baseline knowledge. Now, I've worked with some districts, I'm just talking about writing, and they're like, we're gonna give the writing assessment before we ever teach any writing. And it's like, oh, okay, that's okay. However, you might scare them off and they're gonna hate your writing unit. So why don't we teach a little and then give the baseline test to see what they know at that moment. And it's not like you've taught so much that you're going to have huge effect on what they've done, but you're going to introduce them into a new topic or a new subject without scaring them off, right? Then you're going to take a look and you're going to analyze that data. And so social studies and science teachers, you're like, well, how can I assess something that they don't know anything about this? They're not supposed to know it. This is new, right? Well, we know with next gen science, some things repeat. So you could check what their level of their knowledge is from previous standards of previous years. But you could also just check their knowledge on things that you're going to want them to be able to do, like write a summary. So that's part of what you could be checking too. You want to analyze that data. And like I said, I do not have time after school in my life to sit and analyze tons and tons of data. I do that sometimes. But my quick check is if they've written something out, I'll do a quick sort. When I'm face-to-face and I actually have paper in my hand, I'll do a 3-stack. Got it, almost got it, didn't get it at all. So then I have a choice to make with my intervention with the almost got it and the didn't get it at all, what I'm gonna do. Maybe the almost got it is a pretty big stack, so I'm just gonna reteach to everybody. And then the didn't get it at all, I'll recheck them. And if I need to, I'll pull them into a small group, or individually, I might help them in some way. So I'm gonna provide some additional or different instruction, and then I'm gonna assess again to make sure they're learning and coming along with me. So it's about assessing baseline knowledge, or the knowledge after you get something started, because I don't want to take away the creative, wonderful ways you start your units by an assessment. So you could always get things going and then do an assessment, but then you need to analyze that data. One of the things that I've been having teachers do right now that we're in distance learning, we've been using Google Slides, and each student has a Google slide, and they will write in whatever it is they're working on, whether it's a problem, an idea, a summary, just facts that they might have learned that you were working on with them. And then you can just quickly look at each section you've got, because I know you've got up to 150 kids, and then you can just flag the ones you're worried about, right? If you scan, take one section of your students and you're worried about 30 of them, that's a total reteach, right? But if you scan and you've got 2, well, you're just going to flag those 2 and you're going to remember to talk to them. So that is my quick and dirty way of doing a paper, like when I do an exit ticket, and a paper check when we're face to face. It needs to be quick, it needs to be easy. There are going to be times that you have a full assessment system in place and you're doing common formative assessments and you're gathering the data and entering it in Excel sheets and taking a deep look. But assessment and intervention needs to happen on a more quickly than that. I'm not able to advance my slide. So there's different ways to look at it. A couple of things that I just want to talk about today as a little teaser into what we could be doing in future sessions together is I want to talk about activating knowledge. So a good intervention focuses first on waking up students' brains with a positive presupposition. I know you know this. I know you remember this. Don't assume they don't. Wake it up. If they don't know it, they might at least listen to you and go, I don't know what she's talking about, so I better lean in and pay attention if you make it engaging and interesting. So don't go like this. Don't do this. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. I see this all the time. And Chris was talking about helping a teacher once who tended to ask a lot of questions, right? This is what I used to do. And I've learned to like bite my tongue. This is what I used to do to start a lesson. Who can tell me about intervention? And then I'm taking the teaching baton away from me and I'm handing it to a student and you have no idea what it is they're going to say, right? If you notice today, I didn't start that way with you. I did a little bit before I engaged you with it. So I didn't give away my teaching baton. So are you starting each and every lesson with who can tell me about? Well, let's just teach in micro teaching and just get with it into the mini lesson. Tell them what it is you're going to work on. I know you know about intervention. We're going to work on deepening your knowledge about intervention today. And this is the piece we're going to work on, right? So you have to think about what you're doing to activate knowledge. Tapping prior knowledge isn't all about figuring out what everybody knows. That's assessment. If you're doing that, you're assessing. Tapping prior knowledge is getting the neurons in the brain to wake up so that you can start connecting new knowledge to it and you can get some neural pathways growing for students to learn. And we do that by stating the what, stating the why, stating the how, and then making it interactive. And the most important part is for you to know exactly how you want students to do something. How do you want it? If you want a summary, you better teach the way you want summary. Don't assume that they learned summary in the English class from Mrs. Perry. How do you want a summary? How are they supposed to know to write a summary in science? You've got to be clear. What, why, and how, and making it interactive. That's going to activate knowledge and that's going to help neural pathways grow and form for learning. So another little teaser about things we could work on with intervention are the 3 ways of knowing something. There's connotative memory where we make connections. There's declarative memory where we make statements or we recall information. And there's generative memory where we generate new ideas and thinking and we synthesize information. So today in the breakouts, I've been having you do a little bit of declarative and a little bit of generative, right? So at first it was declarative and then I said, what does this mean for you? What would this look like for you? That's generating new thought. But in the chat box, I've also been doing connotative, make connections to this. I just said this, what kind of connection could you make to that? A lot of times when we're teaching students, we'll teach something on Monday and by Tuesday, we expect them to be able to generate that knowledge in a way that makes sense to them. So I wanna stop for a second and get you thinking about a time that you've been to a PD. It could be a staff meeting. It doesn't have to be a big old full-blown PD. And you'll be like, in the moment, you're like, I get this. This makes total sense to me. I am in the moment. Actually, at the winter convening last year that I was at, that I got to go to before we went into shutdown, there was a speaker and like, oh, I've got this. This makes total sense. I'm in the moment. Everything makes sense. I went to the breakout room after in the afternoon and I was like, what did they say? It didn't make sense, right? Because I hadn't developed the knowledge to be able to generate that information back out. And we do that to students all the time. When they should just be making connections to something, we're asking them to generate knowledge. We're asking them to have generative level of knowing, which is much harder and takes much more time. So have you ever had a moment that you were in something and it totally made sense and then you left and it was muddy? That's because you hadn't moved from making connections to being able to generate your own knowledge and being able to teach it to someone. Because when we're telling, we're actually teaching. So we do this all the time. We should be asking students just to make connections to something if it's brand new. So we've got to be careful with intervention and we're assessing. Are we assessing for them to be way over here in generative knowledge when we just barely started? So we want to match our assessments to where we are in a unit to the level of memory and where they should be at. So think about that. We want to match our students to the level of memory dependent upon where we are in our unit and where they should be at. As we grow in our unit, the more their knowledge should be growing and the more deeply they should know something so they can generate their own thinking and their own knowledge around it. So I'm going to give you an example before I ask you to put something in the chat box. I'm going to give you an example. So my daughter's in medical school. She actually had a test today, and it's really interesting what they do. They have an intervention system at the school she goes to. They don't do pre-tests, but what they do is they do lectures. She's in a fully online program with hands-on sooner face-to-face. So the face-to-face time is they put them in a clinic in year 2, which is really unusual. Most schools don't do that. But what they've been doing this whole time is they get lectures online. They get PDFs online that they're reading and studying, and they test every week. Sometimes they test twice a week. Whatever was taught, they test. Whatever is taught, they test. And there are no grades in this school. So, but you just have to hit a standard level on the test. If you hit a standard level, you don't get intervention. If you don't hit a standard level, you get notified by someone who's going to coach you and help you learn it, and then you get retested. So it's really interesting to watch it. This is how intervention systems should work. I'm teaching you a small bit. I'm testing you. You get it. You're moving on. You don't get it. The class is still moving on, but I'm going to come in there and make sure that you got all of that too. So it's fascinating. It's interesting. But they're only asking them to get to declarative knowledge. Can they recall? They're not asking them to generate anything. They're not in any place. I don't want some med student generating knowledge about medicine. You don't know anything yet, right? So why do we do that to our students all the time? Why do we start them here where they should just be making connections and all of a sudden expect them to synthesize something? Okay? So this is going to be the meat or the focus of the work that we can be doing in this series and working together on. It can be as simple as, I want to work on mini lessons and assessing and reteaching right away. It can be where I want to give a test with 3 types of questions on it and then analyze and see what's happening so that I can make sure I'm going back and doing a reteach. It could be, I know I have a group of students that needs additional help. So if I'm doing the mini lesson with the micro teaching, how can I pull them for a small group? What does that look like in my content area classroom when I've only got a 52-minute period, right? There's all sorts of things we could make this look like. It's about customizing it to you. So I want to just talk very quickly about monitoring and ways to monitor. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to need to monitor who needs the support. Is it the striving student that needs support? Is that the student that's not quite there yet? Not quite meeting that standard? Is it the student that's far from the standard? They're considered striving students. Is it the disengaged student that we often see in secondary settings where, you know, they may be choosing the seat in the back of the room, or they're assigned to the back of the room, they got their head down, they got their hood up, right? Are they disengaged? Are they not with us? Or are they the ones that pretend like they're there, like they've known how to fake it, they fake it, and then the teacher overlooks them because they think they're getting it when they really aren't, okay? The other student that we need to intervene with is a student who has high absenteeism. In our current world, I know I just gave that one about the kid with the hood on, and I'm still seeing that in some of our distance learning classrooms, but I'm also seeing it with the kid that refuses to ever engage with the teacher, right? That's also a disengaged student. The absent student, that may be a system of first intervention that we're doing that's coming out of the school office. And what are we doing to reach out to students, to connect with them, to make sure that they're showing up for school, even in distance learning environment. And then the other student that we need to pay attention to is the student who is not growing. So maybe a student is static in their scores that they're getting, and even if we are intervening, our intervention is not making the grade because they're not growing. We have to figure out what's going on with them. Is it relationship based? Is it emotional based? Is it that they're actually not learning? So here's one way of deciding who needs help. So perhaps you pre-test on a constructed response item from something they've read aloud in class. Like it could be a reading in science or a reading of social studies. And then you put in some sort of read aloud protocol, and then they do the constructed response. through direct instruction. So first you just do the pretest, then you put in a protocol with some direct instruction, and then you do a post-test on the same constructed response item or something very similar to it. Then you can do a quick sort. And I'm always telling teachers, we don't need to do extensive systems and always dig into like Illuminate to figure out who's not learning something. You can take student papers and quickly sort them. They've got it, they're almost there, or they don't have it at all. I've been encouraging many teachers at distance learning to use Google Slides and have students do their final or their pre-test or their final response on one Google slide, because then they can quickly just scan the Google Slides and say they've got it, they're close, they don't have it at all. And then you can keep track of like 5 periods and be able to note who's got it, who hasn't, where do I need to do a reteach. So here's just one example. This happens to be kindergarten and first grade data because it was what I had on my computer, but really ignore the grade level. What matters here is even using simple spreadsheets where perhaps a teacher is putting student names and then noting what the student scores are over time on an assessment that they've been given. This one in particular was STAR, so that is done on the computer, but the teacher in their spreadsheet was able to see who was making growth. So this student was making growth. This student was making growth, but the growth was at a slower pace. This student here, we were worried, but then all of a sudden we had growth. This student's making fairly average growth, and this student is making slow growth. So we would say this student and this student are really in need of an intervention. This student needs to be watched because we had some static and then we had growth. So often taking data and putting it in systematically into a system is really important. The other reason I wanted to show this is I work with a lot of districts that don't have data streams. So they don't have a data stream for the teacher to inform their practice, to inform the principal of what's going on, so the principal can provide support back to the teacher. Data streams within a school and within a district are extremely important and something you need to think about in the intervention systems that you're setting up. I mean, that's just another example of a STAR report. So I'm going to stop that one for a minute. So I want to give you a few minutes in a group, and I understanding, Caitlin, do we have 4 from, where did you say, Buttonwillow or Livingston? I can't remember.
We have 4 Buttonwillow. We have Alondra joining us from Azusa and Jorge joining us from Livingston.
Okay, so we're gonna put Buttonwillow, we're gonna put you in one breakout room so that you can talk right now about what are you thinking about? Where might be an action you wanna take as we go through this series together? Where might you want to go deep with some of the things that I've discussed? And then Azusa and Livingston, we're gonna put you in one room for you to share with each other what you're thinking. We realize you can't make plans district-based, but maybe you could talk about what you might go talk about with your colleagues or an action that you might want to take as we go further in the series. We're going to give you about 10 to 15 minutes here. Let's just say, up to 4:45. We're going to give you up to 4:45 so you have some solid time to share out. I know I presented a lot. Okay, hi everybody, welcome back. So I popped into your rooms just to get kind of a flavor of what you're talking about. And really, Livingston, I was intrigued by your conversation about, it sounds like you have some alternative settings on Wednesday. And I really liked, and sorry if I'm wrong, but I think it's what Heidi was pointing out. I think it was Heidi that said this about, well, what can we do that's something different? So I realized the frustration when you've got students during, distance learning that aren't doing what it is that they're supposed to be doing. But remember, if we bring them back in and then we just force them to do something that they're not already doing, that's kind of like doing that intervention out of frustration, like we're frustrated. So it is rethinking things, making it a good intervention. What could be happening over here? Because bringing them in on Wednesday is an intervention, but just saying, I want you to do something that hasn't been working for you may not make it a good intervention. So there's some things you can do there. I also just want to bring up what I heard in the other room. Alondra was talking about 15-minute meetings that she has with students, which is a great way to think about putting interventions in during distance learning. And what I wanted to share with all of you is those are the kinds of things that we can explore. So I'm going to be available to help you and your teams go deeper with something you want to think about, so we can get in a space and we can work on just an intervention that you're thinking about, like what do Wednesdays look like, or what do my 15-minute meetings look like, and I can help you brainstorm some of that. So one of the reasons why in this series we have let me present again here, gone a little bit into coaching and thinking about coaching is because I really believe in coaching, and I don't think that we implement things when we just go to sit and get PDs and then go off and try something. I really think it's about the collaboration together and putting our heads together that makes a difference. So what this series is going to look like is today was session 1, and then I can meet with you and do some coaching with you and help you with something you want to focus on specifically, which we don't really have the space to do always in a session. And then in session 2, I'll have some additional information about setting up systems of interventions in classrooms, then do some more meeting with you about what you're specifically working on. And then we can come back in session 3. We can focus on systems of intervention and data streams and what does that look like, but also having you share out with each other about what you've been working on. What, maybe if it's the Wednesdays, I'm just going to use that as an example. Like, what have you done with those Wednesdays? And other districts that are in the room with us that day can learn from you, and you can learn from other districts. And then after session 3, again, continuing with some more coaching and meeting with you on your time on what you want to talk about and what you want to work on. And then having a final session in session 4 where we talk about all the things we've accomplished over the series with intervention or made plans for, because I want to throw this out here. We do have one district that wants to spend their coaching time working on something in the future. They're working on summer school, and there's another district that said they might want to make plans for interventions for fall. So, you can use this space and time also to get ready for what's coming next. And I feel really strongly about coaching. Hattie, of course, supports that. He says that coaching effects on achievement scores is a 0.22, and that would make sense. Effect size is a 0.22, and that would make sense because it is a construct that's a bit away from the student. But when it comes to personalized learning, it has a much higher construct when we look at it for our own selves. So my own personal research on coaching shows a strong correlation between coaching and teacher self-efficacy, teacher academic optimism, and then also on positive impacts on student achievement, which is what Hattie's research shows. It is a positive impact. It's just that it is more of an impact for the teachers. It's support for you to feel strong in what you're doing and what you're working on. So I just want to hand over to Chris for thinking about some next steps. There's things you can think about. To what degree are you aligning, maybe with standards or with your assessment system or with your intervention system? How are you using data to guide instruction and student performance, or any of the other things that we've talked about today? Maybe it's just have you had the chance to work effectively with the team? There's all sorts of things we could work on. And this isn't, I don't want you to think, oh my God, coaching, she's going to work with us. This isn't about me hammering an idea I have to you. This is about me saying, how can I support your idea and be a thought partner to you individually? That's what that's really about. To you, I want to thank all of you for being here today on a Friday before a 3-day weekend. Really appreciated meeting you, seeing you in the breakout rooms, and thank you for your time today.